Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar on suspension and expulsion in the California State Preschool Program, or CSPP, hosted by the California Department of Education's Early Education Division. This webinar is being held on October 17th, 2023, and will run from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so I'd like to welcome everyone here today and briefly introduce the amazing team that we have to support this webinar. So my name is Amira Almala, and I work in the Policy Office of the Early Education Division at the California Department of Education, and I'll be the moderator for today. Like I said, we have a great team here today, including staff from the Policy Office who will be the presenters. And to help answer your questions and support, we are joined by our colleagues from the Program Quality Implementation Office, Inclusion Support Office, and Universal Pre-Kindergarten Support and Implementation Office. I also want to warmly mention our staff who provide support behind the scenes to ensure the Zoom is set up and that closed captioning is available. To turn it on, you can click on the CC button on the bottom right of your screen. Our team is committed to being as responsive as possible, but we won't be able to answer every question. So just as a reminder, our chat box is disabled. The CDE team will be able to share links, but you are unable to use the chat. So please utilize the Q&A feature to ask us any questions. And when you ask questions using the Q&A feature, please give as much detail as possible before clicking the submit button. So for example, which contract, the age of the students, and any other important information. And you don't need to rush at all to get those in. Just make sure that you include all the information. Next slide, please. All right, so for our agenda today, we're just finishing up the welcome and introductions, and then we'll get into an overview of suspension and expulsion and some research on suspension and expulsion in preschool. Followed by the guidance from Management Bulletin 2308 on suspension and expulsion in the California State Preschool Program. And Christina will share that link with you now in the chat, just so you can access it. So that will include new definitions, directives for implementation on suspension and expulsion, parent appeals, community care licensing, family child care home education networks, and data collection. And we'll finish up sharing some resources that are available for you all to support children in your programs, and followed by a question and answer session and closing. So I just want to note that we'll be posting these slides and a recording of the webinar to our COVID-19 resources page within a week or two of this webinar. And Christina will also post a link to that page in the chat. Now I will pass it over to Sasha to start us off.
Thank you, Amira, and good morning. First, I want to start with an overview of suspension and expulsion. Suspension and expulsion are common types of exclusionary discipline where children are removed or excluded from learning environments and activities that contribute to the healthy development of the child. However, the challenging behavior that often leads to suspension or expulsion may be related to the child's development, including their communication, language, and social skills development, behavioral health needs, or unidentified or unaddressed disabilities. Suspending or expelling the child does not help to address these issues or get the child the support they may need. At the same time, there is evidence that exclusionary discipline practices, including suspension and expulsion, are tied to negative future academic and cognitive outcomes for children. Young children who were suspended or expelled were also more likely to be suspended or expelled in later years. Next slide. In 2016, the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, found that nationally, preschool suspension and expulsion rates are higher than in K-12 settings, with children expelled in preschool at 3 times the rate of students in K-12. Within those high rates of suspension and expulsion, there are inequities in the rates at which children are expelled from preschool programs. These inequities mirror the unequal suspension and expulsion rates for K-12 students, which suggests that the same groups of students that are excluded from structured learning environments in preschool go on to be excluded throughout their schooling. According to a U.S. Department of Civil Rights 2016 report and 2017-2018 data, preschool boys are suspended and expelled much more often than preschool girls. Black preschoolers are 3.6 times as likely to receive out-of-school suspension as white preschoolers. Black boys have the highest overall rates of suspension and expulsion, and Black girls are the only group of girls that are disproportionately more likely to be suspended. American Indian and Alaska Native boys and multiracial boys are also suspended and expelled at higher rates. Next slide, please. In addition to the inequities by race and gender, children with disabilities are suspended or expelled in preschool at more than 4 times the rate of children without disabilities. Children with trauma histories are also more likely to be suspended or expelled, and the chances increase with each type of trauma that the child has experienced. Finally, there are inequities in suspension and expulsion based on the context of preschool programs, with higher rates of suspension and expulsion in programs when teachers report higher levels of stress and mental health challenges. Next slide, please. Research also tells us about the consequences of suspension and expulsion. Most immediately, suspensions and expulsions equal missed days in school for children and missed opportunities for a structured learning environment. As a result, young children who are suspended and expelled receive less time with social and emotional learning, including emotional regulation and relationship development. The research also shows that early suspensions and expulsions do not resolve the problems. Instead, they predict additional suspensions and expulsions later in school. Children who are suspended from school are more likely to have trouble keeping up academically and more likely to feel unwelcome at school. Then, as students get older, this leads to more students dropping out of school. Next slide, please. Another area where research can inform us about suspensions and expulsions is the relationship between challenging behavior and mental health. I already mentioned that children's behaviors can be the result of unaddressed mental and behavioral needs, but teachers' mental health is also relevant. When children and teachers receive support through early childhood mental health consultation, teachers report fewer problems with challenging behaviors. There is also early evidence that decreasing teacher stress and improving teacher mental health can also reduce expulsions. Evidence suggests that access to and use of early childhood mental health consultation services and other support services can have an effect on teachers' mental health and can help reduce suspensions and expulsions. All this research together helps us to see what the impacts of suspensions and expulsions are on children and why having clear guidance in place for their use is critical, as well as beginning to understand some of the ways that we can support children and teachers and reduce the use of exclusionary discipline. Now I'll pass it to Sarah.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. In this part of the webinar, we'll cover the guidance from Management Bulletin 2308 on suspension and expulsion in California State Preschool Program. We'll drop that link in the chat again for everyone to access. We have several new definitions that are important for CSPP contractors to know and use. Suspension means the removal of a child from all or part of the program day, or prevention of a child from attending the program for 1 or more days in response to the child's behavior. The program cannot encourage or persuade a child's parents or legal guardians to pick up a child before the program day ends due to the child's behavior. It's important to note that moving a child to an isolated or separate room is considered removing the child from a program. Programs may remove the child from a specific situation to calm down or regain composure, such as taking a walk or going to an outdoor environment. However, the child must return to the classroom as soon as they have calmed down and may not be removed for longer than 30 minutes. Expulsion means the permanent dismissal of a child from a program in response to a child's behavior. The program cannot encourage or persuade a child's parents or legal guardians to voluntarily unenroll from the program due to a child's behavior. A final new definition has been added to clarify that persistent and serious behaviors means repeated patterns of behaviors that significantly interfere with the learning of other children or interactions with peers and adults that are not responsive to the use of developmentally appropriate guidance. This includes, but is not limited to, physical aggression, property destruction, and self-injury. Now we'll be moving to the new requirements for CSPP contractors. First, we have a requirement to provide notification to families. Beginning July 1st, 2023, upon enrollment of a child, a CSPP contractor must notify the child's parents or legal guardians of the policy on disenrollment, including expulsion and suspension. This notification must be in writing and must inform parents on how they may file an appeal to the CDE in event of the expulsion or suspension of a child. Contractors should send notification to families with children enrolled between July 1st and the release of the management bulletin in September 2023 immediately. Contractors must notify families of the policy before any suspension or expulsion process can begin. Now I'll go over the policy for suspension and expulsion and requirements from Education Code 8489.1 that state, except in specific circumstances described on the next slides and given in the directive for implementation section of the Management Bulletin 2308, program must not, 1, suspend a child due to a child's behavior, 2, encourage or persuade a child's parents or legal guardians to prematurely pick up a child due to a child's behavior before the program date ends, 3, expel or unenroll a child because of a child's behavior, 4, persuade or encourage a child's parents or legal guardians to voluntarily unenroll from the program due to a child's behavior. The following are allowable circumstances under which a CSPP program may suspend or expel a child from their program. We'll first discuss the allowable circumstances at a high level, and then we'll go deeper into allowable circumstances on the next slides. Suspension must only be used as a last resort in extraordinary circumstances when there is a serious safety threat that cannot be reduced or eliminated without removal of the child. To the greatest extent possible, a program must endeavor to ensure full participation of enrolled children in all program activities. For expulsion, if a CSPP contractor has expeditiously pursued and documented reasonable steps to maintain the child's safe participation in the program and determines a child's continued enrollment would present a serious safety threat to the child or other enrolled children, the program may expel the child and must refer the parents or legal guardians to other potentially appropriate placements, the local child care resource and referral agency, or other referral service available in the local community, and to the greatest extent possible, support the direct transition to a more appropriate placement. Now I'm going to pass it off to Danielle to discuss the procedures program must follow before resulting to a suspension.
Hey everyone. Let's see. Before we get too far in, we want to make sure that we emphasize very, very importantly that suspension and expulsion should only be used as a last resort. Before a state preschool contractor can determine that suspension is necessary, they must collaborate with the child's parents or legal guardians. They must use appropriate community resources as needed, and they must determine that no other reasonable option is appropriate and provide written notice through a notice of action to the parents or to the child's parents or legal guardians. If suspension is deemed necessary, a state preschool contractor must help the child return to full participation in all program activities as quickly as possible, while also ensuring the child's safety by doing at least all of the following. So there's a few things. So it's 4 different steps here. So number 1 is continuing to engage with parents or legal guardians through the whole process. They should be doing it along the way with you. You should be partners in this whole process. Number 2 is continuing to use and provide referrals to appropriate community resources. So this means maybe pulling in an early childhood mental health consultant or reaching out to the local resource and referral agency to see what other available resources are in your area, or using some of the links on the resource page for the management bulletin, etc., to find some other resources to help support the staff and the child in your program. Number 3 is you have to develop a written plan to document the action and supports needed. It can't just be a contractor determining what's best and just having it stored in their head. It has to be written. It has to be talked through. It has to have an agreement. Everyone needs to be on the same page about what the next steps are. And then the fourth thing, if the child has an IEP, so an individualized education plan or an individualized family service plan or IFSP, the contractor with written parental consent is required to reach out to the agency responsible for that IEP or IFSP to help to work with that IEP team or IFSP team to seek consultation on how they can best serve the child in the state preschool program. We want to note that if you end up removing a child from a specific situation to calm down for any amount of time as a brief strategy used to help the child calm down in any circumstances, you want to make sure that the contractor is returning the child to full participation in the program activities as soon as possible, but it also is documented in the child's written plan, and that teacher-child ratio requirements are followed at all times. So that means most contractors have asked this. Does that mean we have to have 2 fully qualified teachers, one for the child that's being taken out to calm down, and then one for all the other children in the classroom? And the answer is yes. You have to maintain those teacher-child ratios at all times. And so a fully qualified teacher must be present with all children at all times. Let's see. So as we go on before expulsion, there are also steps that a contractor has to take before considering expulsion. So if a child exhibits persistent and serious behaviors as defined in Management Bulletin 2308, the contractor must do a few things. So this is a little bit of a list here. So let me go through as easy as possible. Number 1, you have to expeditiously pursue and document reasonable steps to maintain the child's safe participation in the program. Consulting with the child's parents or legal guardians and teacher, and if available, engage an early childhood mental health consultant. Number 2, you have to provide written notice on the process programs are required to follow now to parents or legal guardians of a child exhibiting persistent and serious behaviors prior to this happening, so that they are aware of what the potential consequences are or implications are for their family and for their children. Let's see, what is that? Third, the program must include a description of the behaviors of the child and the program's plan for maintaining the child's safe participation in the program. So this has to be part of that written plan that contractors develop. And then number 4, if the child has an IEP or an IFSP, again, with written parental consent, you have to contact the agency responsible for the IFSP or IEP and seek consultation on serving the child. Number 5, let's see, consider, if appropriate, completing a comprehensive screening to identify the needs of the child. So if this is something that's not done in your program typically, this is something that you could do as part of this process. You could use a screening such as the child's social-emotional just screen the child's social emotional development, which could be something like the ages and stages questionnaires. It could be the Center for Disease Control's Learn the Signs, Act Early. You also could refer the child's parents or legal guardians to community resources as whatever's available in your local area. And then implementing also behavior supports within the program. So whether that means bringing in your early childhood mental health consultant to figure out how you can best support not only children, but the teachers and the parents as well. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so if a program suspends or expels a child beginning July 1st, 2023, so that was the beginning of this program year, if a child is suspended or expelled, the state preschool contractor must issue a notice of action to the child's parents or legal guardians. And in that notice of action, you have to note that the appeal process is a little different. So since the notice of action to suspend or expel a child involves persistent or serious behaviors that could impact the safety of children, the child may not attend the program during the appeal process. So noting that this is a huge change to a typical appeal notice period where children can still attend in that 14 or 19 days, depending on how the notice is delivered. This is different. Children cannot if they're suspended or expelled during those days. The effective date of the action can also not be anything less than 24 hours after you serve the notice to the family. So it is no longer allowable to call a family and say you have to come pick up your child right away. You have to give a notice of action that gives the family 24 hours, which is a big difference in the exception to the notice periods as required by our regulations in section 17783. So typically it's a little different, but for suspension and expulsion, the process has changed. Next slide. Thank you. If a state preschool contractor has done all the steps, they have documented, they have tried to maintain the child's safe participation in the program, and it's still determined that a child's continuous enrollment would present a serious safety threat to the child or other enrolled children, the program may expel the child, but must refer the parents or legal guardians to other appropriate placements. The local child care resource and referral agency or other referral services available in the local community. And to the greatest extent possible, you have to support that direct transition to a more appropriate placement. This is part of continuity of care, but also a huge piece of suspension and expulsion to make sure that children, if they are expelled, their families are not left without any services at all. This determination to expel a child must be made in consultation with the parents or legal guardians of the child's teacher, and if applicable, the local agency responsible for implementing the IFSP or IEP. Typically in state preschool, you're going to have an IEP, so it'd be the LEA that has the oversees the IEP team is who you would need to consult for that. And then noting that the state preschool program has up to 180 days to complete this expulsion process. This does not require that the contractor take 180 days. 180 days is the maximum. So if this process plays out over longer than 180 days, it has to restart. The clock has to restart, but it can take less than 180 days. I'm now going to pass it off to Eddie to move on to the next topic. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle. And good morning, everyone. My name is Eddie Tanimoto, and I'm the budget consultant in the policy office at the Early Education Division. And I'll be discussing various requirements around suspension and expulsion, starting with the requirements around parent appeals. If suspension or expulsion is deemed necessary, the CSPP contractor must, at the same time as issuing a notice of action, or the NOAA, inform the parent or guardian in writing of their right to file an appeal of the action to suspend their child directly with the CDE by submitting a written request for an appeal hearing to eedappeals@cde.ca.gov. That's eedappeals@cde.ca.gov, no later than 14 calendar days after receipt of the notice. It is very important, like Danielle said, to note that this is a change to current requirements. State law now includes a specific appeal procedure for suspension and expulsion of children in CSPP, which differs from the procedures required in Title V CCR Section 17785. One other note I would like to make is that this is only applicable for appeals related to suspension and expulsion. Next slide. Now I'll quickly go into community care licensing and violations. So for CSPP contractors may appeal a citation or civil penalty issued by the California Department of Social Services Community Care Licensing Division that is related to the behavior of a child, including the actions of the facility or its staff related to the behavior of a child. If the facility is in the process of complying with laws related to suspension and expulsion in CSPP, state law specifically Health and Safety Code Section 1596.893C requires CDSS to withdraw all citations or civil penalties upon the presentation of evidence by the facility that it was in the process of complying with suspension or expulsion requirements for CSPP. Next slide. And next, I would like to discuss family child care home education networks. With this, we want to note that Management Bulletin 2308 does not apply to licensed family child care providers who provide services through a CSPP Family Child Care Home Education Network until the Joint Labor Management Committee for Suspension and Expulsion makes recommendations for potential changes related to suspensions and expulsions. Until recommendations have been made, contractors shall provide support to providers as needed to the extent children enrolled in a provider's program have persistent and serious behaviors. Next slide. And with the new requirements for suspension and expulsion, there are also new data collection requirements to keep in mind, and I'll outline those now. Beginning July 1st, 2023, a CSPP contractor shall maintain records on 1, the number of times contractors initiated the process required for suspension during a program year, and the outcome of each reported instance, including, if applicable, how long a child was excluded from the program. Second, they must also maintain records on the number of times contractors initiated the process required for expulsion during a program year and the outcome of each reported instance. And third, the data collected pursuant to the first and second bullets shall include for each child exhibiting persistent and serious behaviors, at a minimum, their age, sex, race and ethnicity, foster status, home language, and disability, if applicable, and whether the child has an IFSP or IEP. Next slide. Lastly, I would like to share a bit about data submission to the California Department of Education. Beginning July 1st, 2030, if funds are appropriated by the legislature for this purpose, CSPP contractors will be required to provide this data to the CDE annually. Note that contractors have assumed in the interest holder feedback process that the data collection at the contractor level does not start until July 2030. However, that is not true. Data collection of suspension and expulsion begins for contractors as of July 1st, 2023. However, they will not have to report the data to CDE until 2030, assuming funds are appropriated to develop a data system that can collect that information. And now I'll pass it over to Amira to share some resources for contractors.
Thanks, Eddie. All right. So I'm going to share here briefly some resources for training, on-site technical assistance, and coaching that can support building a nurturing and responsive environment for all children in your programs. And some of these you may all know, but we just wanted to remind everyone and share in case they're new. So we have the California Collaborative on the Social and Emotional Foundations for Early Learning, which can be accessed at https://center.org/CAIN-CLU-emotional FOUNDATIONS/FOR/EARNING/. We also have the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations, which can be accessed at https://challengebehavior.org/. Then we have the California Early Childhood Online Platform, which can be accessed at www.caarlychildhoodonline.org/. We have the California Preschool Instructional Network, which can be accessed at https://cpin.us/. We have the Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation Network, which can be accessed at https://IECMHCNETWORK.org/. And finally, Quality Counts California, which can be accessed at https://QUA litycountsca.net/. All right, next slide, please. Okay, some more general resources. We have a more comprehensive list of resources that can be found in the resources section of Management Bulletin 2308, which you can access at https://www.cde.ca.gov/sp/MB2308.asp. And some additional resources can also be accessed on the CDE's Inclusive Early Education Resources webpage at https://www.cde.ca.gov/sp/CD/OP/IEERESOURCES.asp. And finally, if there are any questions we can't answer in this webinar and moving forward, please reach out to your assigned Program Quality Implementation Regional Consultant. And the PQI Regional Consultant Directory can be accessed at https://www.cde.ca.gov/SP/CD/CI/CD/ASSIG/NMENTS.asp. All right, and with that, we will move to our question and answer session. And I know we've got a lot of questions in the chat, and it looks like we have some good feedback on what everyone wants answered from the votes. So thank you all for getting those in. I'm going to start off with a question from Lisa Chime. And the question is, where's the funding for the extra teacher we would need to be in the ratio to take a child on a walk to calm down? Where is pay parity so that the stress of surviving is lifted off the burden of classroom teachers? And I'm going to pass that to Virginia to answer.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. So going a little bit deeper into this, the legislature, so all of these new requirements, these are coming from Assembly Bill 2806, which was passed recently, and we're happy to share the link to that bill in the chat if anyone wants to read it. And that bill also included changes to who can provide early childhood mental health consultation services to make it a little bit easier to find early childhood mental health consultants and expand the list of who could provide those services, and that state preschool programs could be funded for providing those services. So around the same time that the bill was passed, the legislature and the governor also increased the adjustment factor for early childhood mental health consultation. So before there was an adjustment factor of 1.05, now it's an adjustment factor of 1.1. And the idea was that there was a recognition from the legislature, from the governor, that these increased requirements for the California State Preschool Program were going to need to be paired with additional funding, and this was the way that they identified to address that. And so for those of you that maybe haven't used that adjustment factor, aren't familiar with it, in any classroom where early childhood mental health consultation services are provided, every single child in that classroom, regardless of whether they're having a persistent and serious behavior or not, every single child in that classroom can benefit from the early childhood mental health consultation factor because they are benefiting from those services being provided to that classroom. And unlike other adjustment factors, this one can be claimed. Normally, you can't claim multiple characteristic adjustment factors. So if you are, for example, have a disability and are a dual language learner, you can only claim one adjustment factor. That is not true for early childhood mental health, the early childhood mental health consultation factor. So for example, if children in your classroom are getting the 3-year-old adjustment factor, they can also be getting the early childhood mental health consultation factor if early childhood mental health consultation services that meet the requirements in statute are being provided. And we're working on an updated management bulletin about the changes there. But for now, you can refer to Education Code 8243, which has a number of those pieces in it. And I will also put the link to that in the chat. So that's one source. Also, I want to remind folks that we are in a hold harmless year, this year and next year. And so to the extent that your contract, maybe you haven't been able to get fully enrolled, maybe you are fully enrolled, but you're not spending all of your funds for whatever reason, you are able to, utilize, any otherwise funds that in a normal year would have gone unearned. And you're able to allocate, on a one-time basis, use those for whatever you need to help your staff adjust to these new requirements. Also wanting to remind folks that the Early Education Teacher Development Grant and the UPK Planning and Implementation Grants are grants at the local level. And we know not everyone on this call is necessarily a recipient, but hopefully you're involved in local planning for UPK and any support that might be needed around suspension and expulsion, around coaching or additional training, workforce development, that would be an allowable use of those grants, all of those existing grant funds, to the extent that that there's space in your community's plan for it. So just a couple of things in addition, just wanting to remind you all that there are a number of pieces of one-time funding coming to contractors. And so if there's a need to allocate some of those for workforce development in this area, that is certainly a possibility as well.
All right, thank you, Virginia. So now we're going to move to a few questions we got regarding what is considered a serious safety threat, and some requests for examples and more of a definition. So I'm going to pass it to Danielle to remind us of the definitions in the management bulletin.
Hi, thank you. So what we will say is that there is no specific definition of what a serious safety threat. So what we'll rely on is the definition around persistent and serious behaviors. So when you look at that, there are specific examples that includes, but is not limited to, physical aggression, property destruction, and self-injury. So we would definitely consider any of those a serious safety threat if they're being exhibited by a child in your classroom. But that doesn't mean that those are the only things. We don't have an exhaustive list because there's lots of behaviors, and that would probably take multiple pages of us to list out every single behavior. So if you are ever concerned or confused or need to get some clarification, definitely suggest you reach out to your PQI consultant. They can help figure out an answer for you of what specific behaviors you're seeing, figure out if that considers a serious safety threat versus not. Just noting, we recognize that this is a challenge for staff. We recognize that this is a challenge for contractors, and we don't want to minimize that this is something that everyone is adjusting to, right? This is something that we are all working towards for the better engagement of children in our state preschool program, right? The end goal of this law is to make sure that children are able to stay in preschool, and to make sure that children, in particular children of color and boys of color, are not excluded at disproportional rates as we move forward into the future. So we want to make sure that contractors are getting the supports that they need. So if you have specific questions, a lot of times the instances around suspension or expulsion are very like specific to one child or a couple children or something. So if you have those types of questions, please reach out to your PQI consultant, and we will assist the best we can in helping get you guys the answers that you need to be able to move forward.
Thanks, Danielle. So we also have another question. So regarding the development of a written plan, it was stated that everyone needs to be in agreement with the plan. Please provide additional clarity on the agreements needed for a written plan. And I will pass to Danielle as well to answer that.
Yes, sorry. Okay, so I want to clarify. I know I said this, but I think I misspoke a little bit. So I want to come back and walk that back a little bit. It's not an agreement of what is in the plan. So a contractor ultimately is going to make that final decision. But what a contractor cannot do is make that decision in a silo anymore. A contractor cannot decide that a child is going to be suspended or expelled without having a conversation with the family first. You cannot just say, hey, I'm calling you and your child is suspended. It has to be a conversation. There has to be some sort of plan. We recognize many parents are not going to agree. Many families are going to have other opinions. And we want to make sure that it's clear that it's not that they all have to be in 100% agreement about what's happening, but they do have to be involved in that decision. And contractors should not be just making this decision without considering the impacts on the family or the child. If you do have an early childhood mental health consultant already engaged in your program, they should also be part of that decision. They should be helping you with the supports of your teachers, your staff, families, noting that the allowances for services that early childhood mental health supports can provide now are much broader. So they can include not just services directly to individual children, but they actually can include services to teachers. They can include services to families, and you can still claim that adjustment factor. So you want to make sure that if you can be proactive, do so. And so that you're engaging those people beforehand, before you have any persistent or serious behaviors, helping your teachers get the support they need beforehand if possible. And then if not possible, definitely making sure that you're reaching out for their supports during, and then that person will also be engaged in that process. Want to also recognize that if a child has an IEP, that IEP team should definitely be involved in that decision. It has to be reported to them with the written parental consent that you can reach out to them. They have to know about it, that like when a child has an IEP, they have really specific supports in place. And so we want to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the IEP also. So it's just noting that ultimately this decision is no longer made in a vacuum or a silo by the contractor. It just has to include all of these different parties now. Hopefully that clears it up a little bit.
Thanks, Danielle. I have another question that I will pass to you for. So by not suspending or expelling the children who display aggressive behaviors, parents of children who get hit complain that we are jeopardizing the safety of their children. How should we respond to that? Can we get in trouble with licensing if parents file a complaint because we, quote unquote, knowingly expose their children to the risk of being hit repeatedly?
Yeah, so I will point contractors to AB 2806. There is actually language in that bill around community care licensing and what their responsibilities are. So what that means is if you're a state preschool contractor and you are in the process of working through one of these scenarios with a child that has persistent or serious behaviors, you have, and say something happens, a parent calls licensing, they come out, they investigate. If you are in the process of documenting and pursuing and trying to maintain that child's behavior or child's participation in your program, there is actually statutory language that requires or that allows contractors to appeal any violations to CCL, and they have to look over the fact that you are implementing other state laws. And so it doesn't like automatically mean you're going to keep that violation. So if you get a violation, there is always your right, if you're in the middle or in the process of doing this, you appeal that back to CCL and say, I'm in the process of this. You show them the documentation, etc. And then that will help you move through that process. What I will say though, is that as a contractor, you have some responsibilities, right? So this is not going to be every situation. If you are very clearly documenting and outlining every single plan for every child that has serious and persistent behaviors, then they're going to look at that and say, okay, we see that you're following another state law. Okay, great. We'll move on. However, if there are things that happen in particular instances where you have a child, but maybe that child wasn't being supervised at that time, or the plan wasn't being followed, or there wasn't documentation to show that you're actually in the process of supporting this, then you're going to have a lot harder time justifying to CCL that you are in the process of implementing this plan. So just keep that in mind as you're going through. Stay consistent, follow your plans, make sure you have your documentation in a row, so that you can help if that process ever does happen, to make sure that those licensing violations don't stick for you.
Thanks, Danielle. Okay, so I'm just looking, we have a lot of questions. So we know that, like we said earlier, we may not be able to get to them all, but we will absolutely follow up and get you all answers to these questions. And like we said, if there's anything that you need to follow up on, you can definitely email your PQI consultant. So I think looking at the questions, I'll be passing a lot to Danielle today. Thank you, Danielle. So we have another one. If the family refused to receive services, such as a referral or mental health services that was agreed upon as a behavioral management plan with families, what is the contractor's responsibility?
I'm sorry, I think I missed the first part of that. What is the first part of the question?
Yeah, if the family refused to receive services, such as a
Like,
referral or mental health services.
Okay, so what we'd want to see is that if you're a contractor and you know that there are certain persistent or serious behaviors that are being exhibited in your program, like I said, early childhood mental health consultant services are not limited to just children receiving them. They are available. You can get the reimbursement and the adjustment factor for also when your teachers are supported by early childhood mental health consultants. So you want to make sure that if a parent exclusively says, no, that's not for me, that's not for my kid, I don't want that, that's their prerogative. I obviously would encourage everyone to have that conversation with families, which can be difficult, I know, to encourage them to have those additional supports, not only for their child, but maybe for the parent as well, if they're feeling stressed out or whatever it may be. But also as the contractor, your responsibility then falls, okay, what can I provide my staff? What supports can I give my staff if I can't give specific supports to this child? Because typically, what you'll find is that when staff are better able to handle it, and they have the resources and they're supported, it sometimes becomes off of the child, and they're able to take on some of those difficult behaviors because they have support and they have the resources and they have the understanding of how to deal with and work through those in their classrooms. And so the more we support teachers, the more we support staff, and the more we support parents, the better everyone will be able to move through this, and we'll get to a place where we can hopefully have a whole lot less suspensions and expulsions in state preschool, is what the ultimate goal is.
Absolutely. Okay, so the next question, and we just have a few more minutes here before we end. So make sure to get all your questions into the Q&A. The next question we'll address is, does the infant and early childhood mental health consultation, I'm assuming that network, have the capacity to serve the number of staff and programs that will be requesting their services in the coming months and year? So I will pass to Virginia to answer this question.
Thanks for the question. So I think that's the network. Also want to make sure that folks are aware that the list of who can provide early childhood mental health consultation services is rather broad. You can find it in Education Code section 8243. And I just put the link to that in the chat. I'm going to try to copy and paste piece by piece the definition, but it's like I can't put it in all at the same time because Zoom has a character limit. But essentially, it lists out very specifics who can provide these services. And it's very broad. A licensed mental health professional, including a marriage and family therapist, a licensed clinical social worker, a licensed professional clinical counselor, a licensed psychologist, a licensed child and adolescent psychiatrist, a credentialed school counselor, or a school psychologist that's credentialed according to a number of different laws. And that they have to have at least 3 years of experience providing mental health services to children 0 to 5. And they also have to have training in infant, family, and early childhood mental health. They have to be insured. They have to have had their license for at least 2 years. And they have to be in full compliance with the continuing education requirements of their profession. And then these other paragraphs that I'm copying into the chat basically say, if you can't find someone that meets all of those ones, but you can maybe find one of those people, you can have people that have a little bit less experience, following very specific work experience if they're supervised by somebody that meets everything in number 1. So just wanting folks to see that, because I think, look, if you sort of can see, oh, anyone who, is a marriage and family therapist, has 3 years of experience doing mental health for children 0 to 5, has training in infant, family, and early childhood mental health, has the insurance, and has had their license for at least 2 years, and is in compliance with continuing ed, then, it starts to realize that, there are a whole number of folks that maybe will meet these requirements. So hopefully that's helpful. We're hoping to get our guidance out about the more specifics related to this management, to this law in the coming months, because we know that this is a key part of the suspension and expulsion support. Hopefully that helps. And back to you, Mary.
Thanks, Virginia. Yeah, and it looks like we do have a few more questions in the Q&A about who exactly qualifies for the adjustment factor and how contractors can access that. So definitely look out for that management bulletin that will explain all of those pieces. Okay, so just scanning the chat, the Q&A. See what other questions we may be able to answer. Right. I think just keeping in mind the time, we do want to give a little bit of time for our closing. So I think, Tristan, if you could pull the slides back up, and we will absolutely make sure to take all of these questions back. We absolutely hear everyone's concerns. And we will be responding and providing more support for those. So I am going to pass it over now to our Division Director, Stephen Profiter, to close us out.
Yeah, Mira, thank you for that. I was just I was engrossed in the questions that were coming in, reviewing, trying to unpack, understand some of the concerns here, and supports that are needed. I think one thing just that I'll say, and sounds like I'm not on Do Not Disturb, so you all get to hear all the notifications that are happening behind me. So I think though, just some reflections on this is, I think we'd emphasize that, as we think about this new policy, who the population that we're trying to support, we don't want to exclude children. We want children to be included and engaged in these learning opportunities to the greatest extent possible. We talked at the top about all the research that supports this, but know that implementation, there may be some new things here, there may be some challenging things in here, and so what we'd emphasize is you don't go it alone. There are resources out there the infant early child mental health consultation. I heard R&Rs, fellow contractors that may be doing this exceptionally well. We've got some resources that we're putting in the guidance. It's not. And we'll continue to look and see what we can add, what we can uplift. I want to highlight a couple things that I think I heard Virginia say earlier in response to one of the questions. We're in hold harmless mode for the next 2 years. So if you're anticipating that you're going to have unearned contract funds, consider that. Is there room in your contract to address some of the needs that are coming up for you? Can funding address some of it? There's also the cost of care plus rate payments that will be coming shortly. How can those support your staff in this? We also heard a bit today around serving children with disabilities. So we're taking any questions that we can't answer here back to our special education partners at CDE to support responses and guidance. And I think the last thing is, as I was reviewing just the many questions that were coming in, it's a stark reminder that as a profession, our state preschool educators need more professional learning opportunities. So as we think about supports needed to implement like this policy and other policies, professional learning opportunities is absolutely a part of that. We've talked about, current funding and resources, but what is out of reach for too many of our programs is the ability to engage in professional learning that doesn't require staying beyond the regular workday or the weekend. So at CDE, we've been elevating the need for in-service professional development days, and that's something that we're going to continue to elevate. But I'll say that it can't be our voice only. We're one voice, and I think what really resonates with legislators, right? So it would require legislative change. What resonates are stories. And we do our best to kind of uplift those stories, but I think we need, this is something that I think we all need to be advocating for. So we'll continue to do it, but just noting that that's something that we definitely see as a need. And as I'm finding myself kind of at a loss for words for anything else, I think this is a natural closing point. So thank you, CDE team, for pulling this webinar together. I think you all see that we're passionate about this. We want to support children, families. We want to support you. And really appreciate you all taking some time early in the morning on a Tuesday to seek out guidance for implementing this policy. We'll look for other opportunities to engage and support you all on that. So have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday and week, everybody.